once you realize, like Newton did, that, heavenly motions and earthly motions are governed by the same principles, and you unify terrestrial and celestial motion, you get these more powerful ideas. And I think where life is somehow unifying these abstract ideas of computation and information with the physical world, with matter, and realizing that there's some explanatory framework that's not physics and it's not computation, but it's something that's deeper.
So answering the question of what is life requires deeply understanding something about the universe as information processing, the universe as computation.
Sort of.
Something about, would, once you come up with an answer to what is life, will the words information and computation be in the paragraph?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, damn it. Okay.
I know.
So there's no shortcuts to you.
No. I don't believe in things like Boltzmann brains or, fluctuations out of the vacuum that can produce things like your desk ornaments. I actually think they require a particular causal chain of events to exist.
Well, I appreciate the togetherness of that. But so how does that, if we have to simulate the entire universe to create the ornaments and the two of us, how are we supposed to engineer life?
Yeah, that's
in the lab.
This goes back to sort of the critique of the RNA world. I think one of the problems, and I'll get to answering your question, but I think this is kind of relevant here. Mm-hmm. One of the problems with the RNA world, when we test it in the laboratory, is how much information we're putting into the experiment. We specify the flasks, we make pure reagents, we mix them, we take them out, we put them in the next flask, we change the pH, we change the UV light, and then we get a molecule. And it's not even an RNA molecule necessarily, it might just be a base, right? And so people don't usually think about the fact that we're agents in the universe making that experiment, and therefore we put a little bit of life into that experiment. Because it's part of our biological lineage, in the same sense that a cup or I am a part of the biological lineage. The experiment
our ideas are injecting life.
Yes.
To the experiment.
And the constraints that we put on the experiments, because those conditions wouldn't exist in the universe on planet Earth at that time without us as the boundary condition, right? So
even though we're not actually adding any actual chemistry or biology that it could be identified as life, are the constraints we're adding to the experiment, the design of the experiment.
Yeah, you can think of the design of the experiment as a program. You put information in. It's an algorithmic procedure that you design the experiment. And so the origin of life problem becomes one of minimizing the information we put into physics to actually watch the spontaneous origin of life. The theories we have in physics, they have problems. They have lots of problems, and they're very deep problems, and we don't know how to patch them. And some of those problems become very evident when you try to patch quantum mechanics and general relativity together. So there is this kind of interesting feature that some of the ways of patching that might actually closely resemble the physics of life. And so the place where that actually comes up most, and actually we just had a workshop in the Beyond Center where I work at Arizona State University, and Lee Smolin made this point that he thinks that the theory of quantum gravity, when we solve it, is going to be the same theory that gives rise to life. And I think that I agree with him on some levels, because there's something very interesting where if you look at these sort of causal set theories of gravity, where they're looking for space as being emergent. And so space-time is an emergent concept from a causal set, which is also sort of related, I think, to what Wolfram's doing with his physics project. It's the same kind of underlying math that we have in this theory that we've been developing related to life called assembly theory, which is, basically trying to look at complex objects like molecules and bacteria and living things as as basically being assembled from a set of component parts, and that they actually encode all the possible histories that they could have in that physical object. So mathematically, all these ideas, I think, are related. I think a lot of people are thinking about this from different perspectives. And then constructor theory that David Deutsch and Chiara Marletto have been developing is a totally different angle on it, but I think getting at some similar ideas. So it's a really interesting time right now, I think, for the frontiers of physics and how it's relating to maybe deeper principles about what life is. So short answer, yes. Long-winded answer, rewind.
Can we talk about aliens?
Anytime.
So I think one interesting way to sneak up on the question of what is life is to ask, what should we look for in alien life? if we were to look out into our galaxy and into the universe and come up with a framework of how to detect alien life, what should we be looking for? Is there set of rules? It's both the tools and the tools that are serve as sensors for certain kind of properties of life. So what should we look for in alien life?
Yeah. So we have a paper actually coming out on Monday, which is collaboration. It's actually really Lee Cronin's lab, but my group worked with him on it, and we're working on the theory, which is this idea that we should look for life as high assembly objects. What we mean by that is, which is actually observationally measurable. And this is one of the reasons that I started working with Lee on these ideas, is because being a theorist, it's easy to work in a vacuum. It's very hard to connect abstract ideas about the nature of life to anything that's experimentally tractable. That kind of idea as a physical observable of molecules is completely novel. And what his lab's been able to show is that if you look at a bunch of samples of non-biological things and biological things, there's this kind of threshold of assembly where, as far as the experimental evidence is, and also your intuition would suggest, that non-biological systems don't produce things with high assembly number. So this goes back to the idea, a protein's not going to spontaneously fluctuate into existence on the surface of Mars. It requires an evolutionary process and a biological architecture to produce a protein. You generalize that argument, a complex molecule or a cup or a desk ornament in this sort of abstract idea of assembly spaces as being the causal history of objects. And you can talk about the shortest path from elementary objects to an object given an elementary set of operations. And you can experimentally measure that with a mass spec. And this is sort of the inversion from the logic of physics, because physics, as it's always been constructed, has treated us as external observers of the universe. And we are not part of the universe. And this is why the problem of life, I think, demands completely new thinking, because we have to think about ourselves as minds that exist in the universe and are at this particular moment in history and looking out at the things around us and trying to understand what we are inside the system, not outside the system. We don't have descriptions at a fundamental level that describe us as inside the system. And this was my problem with cellular automata also. You're always an external observer for a cellular automata. You're not in the system. What does a cellular automata look like from the inside?
I think you just broke my brain with that question. Exactly, but that's
I thought about that for a long time. But
I'm gonna, that's a really clean formulation of a very fundamental question, because you can only, to understand cellular automata, you have to be inside of it. But as a human, sort of a poetic, romantic question, does it make you sad? Does it make you hopeful? Whether we're alone or not, in the different possible versions of that, if we're the highest assembly object in the entire universe, does that
at this moment in time, maybe.
At this moment in the causal,
because we may, I
chain.
assume we have a future.
Well, we definitely have a future. The question is where that future decreases the assembly. It could be we're at the peak, or we could be just
that would be inconsistent with the physics in my mind. But so I should give a caveat. I've given the caveat that I'm biased as a physicist, but I'm also biased as an eternal optimist. So pretty much all of my modes of operation for building theories about the world are not like an Occam's razor, what's the simplest explanation, but what's the most optimistic explanation. And part of the reason for that is if you really think explanations have causal power, in the sense that the fact that we have theories about the world has enabled technologies and physically transformed the world around us. I think I have to take seriously that as a part of the physics I want to describe and try to build theories of reality that are optimistic about what's coming next, because the theories are in part the causes of what comes next.
So there could be a physics of hope or a physics of optimism in there too.
Yes.
That seems like also, optimism does seem to be a kind of engine that results in innovation.
Yes.
So this is why the hell are we trying to come up with new stuff?
Oh, so I made this point about thinking life is the physics of existence. And it's not just the physics of existence, it's the physics of more things existing. So I think one of these drives
creativity.
creativity, like optimism. So people like entropy. I don't like entropy as it was formulated in the 1800s. I think it's an antiquated concept, but this idea of maximizing over the possible number of states that could exist. Imagine the universe is actually trying to maximize over the number of things that could physically exist. What would be the best way to do that? The best way to do that would be evolve intelligent technological things that could explore that space.
So, okay, that's talking about alien life out there in the universe. But you've also earlier in the conversation mentioned the shadow biosphere. So is it possible that we have weird life here on Earth that we're just not, like, even in a high assembly formulation of life, that we're just not paying attention to, we're blind to? Like life we're potentially able to detect, but we're blind to. And maybe you could say, what is the shadow biosphere?
Sure. Yeah, the shadow biosphere is this idea that there might have been other original life events that happened on Earth that were independent from the original life event that led to us and all of the life that we know on Earth. And therefore, there could be aliens in the sense they have a different origin event living among us. And it was proposed by a number of people, but one of them was Paul Davies that I mentioned earlier is my mentor, and he has a really cute way of saying it, that aliens could be right under our noses or even in our noses. With a British accent, it sounds better. But anyway, so the idea is like it could literally be anywhere around us. And if you think actually about the discovery of like viruses and bacteria, for a long time they were kind of a shadow biosphere. It was life that was around us but invisible. But this takes it a little bit further and saying that, all of those examples, viruses, bacteria, and everything that we've discovered so far has this common ancestry, in the last universal common ancestor of life on Earth. So maybe there was a different origin event, and that life is weirder still and might be among us, and we could find it. We don't have to go out into the stars to look for aliens, just here on Earth.